years ago, millions of people tuned in to watch The Biggest Loser. It was incredibly popular, and there's been a lot of controversy about this show ever since. I'm really late to the game as I'm only going through watching it now. I'm using it as motivation on my spin journey here. So this is what I watch during my spin sessions. I know there's been a lot of controversy around this show and the methods they used in the show. I just finished season 1, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over The Biggest Loser and talk about what the show did right and didn't do right. I'll talk about the things that I think are controversial before I go into what mainstream media has to say about it. I think the show has a lot of positives, and I don't think that's going to be a very popular opinion. I think at the time the show was incredibly popular, but on reflection, there's a lot of talk about what they did wrong or what they could have done different. I'm going to take it as the point of view of entertainment and exercise, and I'm going to go about it from both viewpoints. I'm not sure everybody's going to agree with me on the things I have to say, and that's great. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and we can talk about it in the comment section. But as usual, I'm going to go over this with a scientific lens. We're going to talk about specifically what happened in that show, what did work, what didn't work, and what worked despite going against better medical evidence. Because as I said a lot of times before, everything works and nothing works forever. So certain things that happened in the show did work despite the fact that they probably shouldn't have worked. Keep in mind, The Biggest Loser was a show. The purpose of the show was to provide entertainment, but that doesn't mean there wasn't a lot of value in The Biggest Loser that we can learn from. There's a lot of really good fitness advice that was actually through the show. However, not all the advice that was given was good, and we're going to go over that as well. So let's get into it. Let's talk about The Biggest Loser, the things they did right, and the things they should have done better. Let's get into it, guys. Let's talk a little bit first about what the show did right, because believe it or not, The Biggest Loser wasn't a complete write-off as far as fitness advice goes. There are some good things about The Biggest Loser. And I'm going to start with more of a big picture take on it before I get into the specifics. But a show dedicated to helping obese people change their life is a really good idea for a show. The concept that it's time for them to change their life, or they're going to die, or something serious is going to happen, they're not going to be with their loved ones, is a repeating and recurring theme within a lot of the episodes. A lot of people are there because they're getting sick, they're unhealthy, they need to change their lifestyle, and it's now or never. That's a great idea for a show, and in a time when obesity is more rampant than it's ever been, the core concept behind the show is solid. One of my biggest problems with the show is how they go about doing it. They teach the contestants a lot of theories, fitness habits, and diet habits, which anybody who knows true fitness would never encourage people to do. Now, there's a caveat to that, and I want to point out something really important. It's one thing when you're getting into fitness and you have the luxury of being healthy enough to be able to do things right. You're maybe slightly overweight. It's time for you to develop a fitness program, and you can sit back and you can say, this is how you do it right. I have the time to take. Some people in that show were morbidly obese and their clock was ticking. They had to make some severe changes, some severe diet alteration, and add more exercise, more movement into their routine. So it's okay to push them a little bit farther than an average person. Just because they were incredibly big doesn't mean they're fragile and they couldn't do a good workout program. The problem is one of the worst mistakes a lot of beginners make, and I can honestly say every single contestant was guilty of this, not because of them, but because of their trainers, is overtraining. People, when they first start exercising, overtrain. They overtrain a lot. They work out the same body parts too consistently. They're doing too many exercises, too many sets. They're too gung-ho. They're hitting their body too hard, and they're not giving it a chance to recover. They're not sleeping enough, and they're not eating the right foods. All those contestants were absolutely overtraining. Exercising for hours and hours and hours on end is too much. Now, when it comes to cardio, and because they were trying to lose weight, you can definitely push your cardio to the max. You can do several hours of cardio if you're really trying to drop that weight. But when it comes to weightlifting and building muscle, there's a limit, and more is not better. Your muscles are not built while you're exercising. Your muscles are getting torn down, and the only way you build better muscle is to rest. It's to rest, it's to eat right, and it's to sleep. You need to get your diet right, and that's where you build muscle. And if your argument's going to be they weren't truly trying to build muscle, they were just trying to lose weight, then they could have eliminated a lot of that weight training and just done some basic weight training to add a little bit of muscle to their frame. Because you're not going to build muscle doing light weight for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, which is honestly what it looked like in some of those episodes they were doing. You're not going to build muscle that way. So if you're not going to build muscle the proper way, there's no point to do it at all, because doing light weights is a lot worse than doing good cardio for weight loss. You're trying to do a calorie deficit, and minute for minute, time for time, doing some moderately intense cardio is always going to be better than doing light weightlifting. So there is no point to that. That was all for show. I mean, when you're trying to lose weight, I would always encourage adding some strength training to your routine. Absolutely. Weight loss and muscle gain go hand in hand, and it's an excellent thing to teach beginners. The problem is when you do it for hours on end, you are absolutely spinning your wheels and wasting your time. And that was definitely in the show. Another thing that they sort of got right in the show is that they did have personal trainers. Now, personal trainers are excellent when they give you individualized routines. Everybody's different. Everybody started that show in completely different points of their life, and they needed individualized routines. Now, there were 2 trainers, so I'm not going to name names. We all know there's a male and female trainer. The male trainer seemed like he was a lot more interested in getting to know his team and developing a program for them. That's what it appeared through him talking. So we'll give him the benefit of the doubt that if that was truly what he did, individualized plans for people with a personal trainer, that is the best way to go. The other trainer just seemed to want to throw people in, work them as hard as possible, and then I'm just reiterating what I already said about overtraining. Leading right into a problem that leads to was the actual show showed everybody often doing the exact same workout. Once again, everybody's body's going to be different. Certain people are going to stop, certain people aren't even going to be able to run. So training really needs to be individualized, and this group mentality about the way they did it has its pros and cons. When you're working out in a group, you have that extra motivation. So that is a bonus for sure. You have a personal trainer who's there to try to motivate you. I believe there was one trainer really good at positive reinforcement, which is the way. It doesn't do any good for somebody to scream at you, hey, stupid, or hey, you're too slow, or you're a failure. Now, I didn't see any of that exactly, but I do believe one of the trainers was more focused on negative reinforcement than maybe positive. Another nice point of the show was that the show often indicated that it was trying to prepare them for real life. It was trying to teach them things that they would be able to use once they got out of the program, once they were off the show. And that's a great philosophy. Whether or not it worked, and I have reason to believe it probably didn't, just because, like I said, there's a lot of negative publicity about this show. But from what they were saying the right things. They were encouraging them to develop a training program that they could continue on when they were out. Now, the training program from the show was ridiculous. Once again, it was overtraining to the max. But they were also teaching them the philosophies behind muscle building and things like that, even though they weren't practicing what they were preaching. One good thing was that they were teaching them the more important part of losing weight, which was nutrition. One of the trainers was teaching them to read labels, to know what you're eating, and to break down the nutrients and things like that. That's really important. You are never going to lose weight if you don't understand nutrition. Nutrition is so much more important than exercising, so much more when it comes to lose weight. So they had that excellent philosophy of teaching you the skills that you would need to truly lose weight going forward. Because no matter how long the show was, 13 weeks or whatever, you're never going to achieve your forever goal in that amount of time. You're going to need to keep these practices going outside of the show. And in fact, that is exactly what they did toward the end of the season, from what I saw. And that's great. That's when your true temptation is going to present itself. And that's where you're going to see how well you can hold up when you're no longer in a group of people, of all like-minded people trying to achieve the same goal, when you don't have that personal trainer yelling at you, when you don't have that money on the line, and you don't have that weigh-in looming over your head, how well are you going to do? Are you going to be able to stick to it? Those are the important things. Those are the things you need to learn and you need to stick with. Nothing's more important than consistency. But piggybacking on the topic of temptation and things like that, I'm a little split on what I felt about the way they tempted them with bad food. So for some challenges, they tempted them to eat bad food. And the idea was that you need to be able to resist these temptations when you're out, when you're off the show and you're in the real world. There's going to be bad food all around you. You're going to need to resist. Totally agree. I think they could have taken that temptation idea and worked it a lot better. What I did see was horrible in that they tempted them with bad food. They blackmailed them essentially. If you want to talk to your family, you have to eat this cake. It's terrible that they know that these people are begging to see their family and they're basically trying to shove cake down their throat to give them that opportunity. I don't think that is the way they should have provided temptation. They did provide temptation in some better ways. There was always cakes and things. I think they had a freezer with all their favorite foods in it. I don't think anybody ever touched it, but it was always there. So they did have temptation. But when you tied that temptation to something that you really needed, like a letter or a call to your child or your wife, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous temptation, because never in the real world is your wife going to be like, you can call me tonight if you have this slice of cake. That's not real. That's going too far to people who are still haven't built that willpower. That's still not one of their strengths. That was far too much. And that was clickbait, made for TV stuff. And I understand that it was entertaining, but I think the show could have been more wholesome if you cut that stuff out and truly had a show where you're setting people up for success instead of constantly tempting them to fail. I know that failure is more entertaining to watch, but I think that if you truly wanted to walk away proud of the type of show you created, you could have cut that type of stuff out. Truly, there were a lot of heartwarming points in the show. There were a lot of moments that were really good. When the teams came together, when people lost the weight they expected to lose, it was wonderful. It was, they had the right idea going, but there were disappointments too, and some of them were setting unrealistic expectations. Moving into the negatives of what I saw in the show, even without knowing about the controversy, there were so many negatives to what I was seeing when it comes to realistic expectations. And millions of people were watching that show, and they were thinking that things that they saw there were real or were possible, and they're not. They might have happened on the show, but what happened behind the scenes. I have no doubt about that. We need to talk about the fact that there were contestants that were losing 15, 20, 25 pounds a week after week on the weigh-ins, and that's not possible. You literally cannot starve that kind of weight off your body in a week. So there are a lot of other things going on, and you have to understand that your body's not supposed to lose that kind of weight. Your body's not supposed to be losing 25 pounds a week, 20, 25 pounds, even 15 pounds, even 10 pounds a week. Your body's not designed to lose that kind of weight. It should be slow and consistent. You can absolutely lose 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 pounds in your first couple of weeks, because those are going to be your easy weeks, especially if you're obese, you have a lot of weight to drop. But a lot of that is going to be water weight. And where I didn't see on the show them really truly explaining and setting them up with proper expectations of what was happening going week by week. 1 week they would have a weight loss of 10 to 15 pounds, and the next week they might only lose 2 or 3, and they're like, what happened? I worked out the same amount. And it's like, yeah, you probably did, and you probably retained more water that second week, and we're talking about pounds and pounds of water, or your metabolism shut down, or you didn't count your calories right in your diet, or didn't count the calories that you were burning in your fitness routine, because doing 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of exercise a day, it's really hard to keep track of exactly how many calories you're burning. In fact, it's impossible when you're mixing cardio in with light weights. You could get a rough estimate if possible. But the calorie deficit they must have had to get that kind of weight is completely unsustainable and it's not healthy. And it led to a lot of injuries. And that's another negative I saw. There were a lot of injuries. I'm going to be honest with you, far fewer injuries than I was expecting. People who clearly had no true idea of how to exercise, there were far fewer injuries. I mean, they probably wouldn't show it. Nobody had a heart attack on the show, which, you know, if you're 300 plus pounds, having been sedentary for so long, you're asking for a heart attack. You're asking for trouble by doing 5 hours of exercise a day and cutting your diet down to a pittance of what it was. It's crazy. And I'm sure there were a lot of things that we didn't see. But you are setting yourself up for injury. You are going to get injured doing that. Your knees can't possibly sustain that kind of stress. Your ankles and your muscles in general, your tendons, they're not ready for that. You need to work your way in. You need good warm-ups. And I'm sure they did warm-ups before their exercise in the day, but I mean warm-ups for these fitness routines. You need to step it up. You can't go from not exercising to hours of exercise a day, every day, 7 days a week, plus cutting your calories. You would be a zombie. You would be useless. And I know there was something going on to keep these people motivated and energized that we didn't see, because it's just simply not possible. Another negative I saw for the show, and this is just for me personally, I didn't particularly like the way the voting went at the end. The losing team got to vote who they wanted off, and it wasn't always the weakest person or the person who lost the least. And that's good to some extent, because just because on a given week you didn't lose the most weight doesn't mean you should be cut. But there was a lot of cattiness, there was a lot of strategy, in which case they would vote off the best person because they were too much of a threat to the rest of the team. I don't know if you should be punished for doing excellent. There could have been another voting system in place. That voting was just, it was a popularity contest. And I watch other shows where there's such a voting system, like Hell's Kitchen, for example, and there is a voting system, but it's also backed up by the fact that it could be overruled anytime by the host. The host is like, I can see what you did was catty, I'm going to overrule that, and I'm going to vote off the worst person. They could have done something like that instead of it just being a popularity contest, and made it a little bit more fair and feel better. Like, there were a lot of times when people were voted off and it's like, this is your strongest person and you just didn't want to go up against them in the finals. Didn't really like how that vote played out, but once again, it's only because I'm comparing it to a show that had a better system. Some people probably give or take it, but that's just a criticism I have. Overall, what would I say about the show, having watched just season 1? I would say that the show, as far as a show goes, was entertaining. It provided a lot of drama and a lot of emotion, and I think that that emotion and drama came from the safety of the contestants. As far as the show goes, it's pretty entertaining. But as far as fitness advice goes, and once again, I'm not saying the show ever claimed to be fitness advice, but millions of people watched, millions of people saw these contestants lose weight, and they get ideas in their head. So this show is an educational tool, which it's going to be used by, regardless of the intention of the producers. It's going to be used as an educational document. People are going to use this as their own blueprint. It's a terrible show for that purpose. It's going to teach you all the wrong things with only a couple of exceptions. You're going to get injured. You're going to overtrain. You're going to push yourself past the limit. You're going to start doing too much and getting less back. You're not spending enough time learning about the proper things, which includes sleep and nutrition. Nutrition and exercise go hand in hand. In fact, nutrition is more important than exercise when it comes to weight loss. You can't run off a bad diet. If you're going to do 5 or 6 hours a day, you're going to get pretty close. But the problem is that isn't sustainable. Nobody's going to do 5 or 6 hours of cardio a day, every day, 7 days a week for the rest of their life. So my statement stands: you can't outrun a bad diet. You need to learn about eating. You need to learn about proper fitness and rest and recovery. Once again, going back to what I said about the show, they did talk about nutrition. One of the trainers was really good to teach them nutrition. And in fact, one positive thing I failed to mention was when one team lost and they said, hey, should we eat even less? And the personal trainer of that team said, absolutely not. In fact, you should be eating a little bit more. And that was excellent advice. The trainer realized that they weren't consuming enough calories to keep their body maintained. They were getting in that danger section where their body was going to shut down, their metabolism was going to slow down, and that trainer said, let's eat a little bit more. It was the eat less diet, which there was an eat less and eat more diet, which are just names which mean barely anything. The fact of the matter is that diet, regardless of what you say, should always be the same. There should be a calorie deficit. The deficit should be minimal, 500 calories, and you will lose a sustainable amount of weight over a long period of time, and that is how you lose weight successfully and safely. The show encouraged bad habits, provided bad, unfair temptations, pushed people far past their limit, and I can't believe it didn't result in more injuries or something worse than it did. As far as the show goes, I'd say it's pretty entertaining, but please don't take that show as fitness advice. Anyway, that's my initial impressions of a show that's decades old now that I'm just getting around to while doing my own cardio here at home. I had the privilege of getting a bike that allows me to do excellent cardio. I recently did a review on this bike. I'm not sponsored by it. I just provided my own opinion. I think it's a wonderful tool in my own weight loss. And accompanying me with that was a new show, The Biggest Loser, something I missed when it was in its prime, and now I'm catching it, and now I'm seeing the dangers, and I'm starting to realize where a lot of the misinformation that's in our fitness world has come from, because a mainstream show like this is telling you all the wrong things. Anyway, it's my job and people who know better to tell you what is wrong with that advice and to guide you in the proper direction. So I hope you heed the things I had to say. You can fact check the things I say. I encourage it. Let's talk in the comment section. What did you think about the show? What did you like or not like? What are some things I missed that were even worse than the things I did catch? I'd love to talk about it. I want to talk about this show. It's influential, and I realize it's old, but the information that it provided is still out there. It's still being watched, so we need to talk about it, and we need to fix these misconceptions. Thanks a lot for joining, guys, and catch me on the next one. See you later.